This segment is all about the business of podcasting. Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Imperial, and this segment's brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where busy professionals publish to educate consumers, grow their businesses, and to leave a legacy. Joining me on this segment is Michael Osborne. He's the founder of 14th Street Studios. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Michael, tell us a little bit about your work and specifically, who are the types of folks that you help?
Sure. I'm a creator and consultant, a producer. I work with a wide variety of clients. My specialty tends to be with independent producers, independent creators, and I'm especially strong when it comes to early stage creative development, which to translate that into plain language means if somebody has an idea for a podcast, I help them really think through what's that going to look like, is it going to take to get that off the ground, what do you want it to sound like, and how do we put the whole thing together?
So, as you mentioned, for people that have that idea for a podcast, what inspires them? Is this something that's going to help their business? What are their thoughts around creating a podcast, and what do they believe it's going to do for them?
That's a great question, and that's exactly where I start the conversation. I think that for a lot of people, a podcast is one of many communication strategies that they may be interested in. And so, what can it do for you? There are ways in which you can directly monetize a show if you happen to have breakout success. But for a lot of people, it's really about a lot of things that don't necessarily have monetary value attached to them. It's about personal branding. It's about networking. It's about refining your own message. It's about storytelling, and it's about letting the world know you're out there. All of those things, of course, have value, but it may not be about direct monetization. So that's one thing I like to share with people who I work with. The other thing is actually I really like your word inspiration there, because a lot of people who come to me, I say, "What are you inspired from? What are the shows you're thinking about? What do you have in mind?" Because that word podcast can mean so many different things to so many different individuals and organizations that getting a little more specific can be really helpful.
Terrific. When you finally have that, purpose for that podcast, what's the biggest challenge then? When people are getting started and they don't know where to start, what is their biggest challenge?
That's interesting. It's hard to sort of pattern match across a variety of use cases, but a lot of it really is around differentiation, right? It's such a crowded space that, how can you do something unique and different in the realm of podcasting? How can you tell different stories? How can you develop a different value proposition for the listener that feels new, original, fresh, exciting, that really brings people in? And a lot of that can be focused around title and tagline brainstorms and development. So I'll spend a lot of time with people really working on, very essential, stripped down, core, clear messaging. Once you have that, you kind of know what to do both inside a show and how you're describing it to your target audience.
Since podcasting, it's been around for quite a while, but it's only recently really exploded since the pandemic and people really discovering podcasting. So it's still kind of like a wild, wild west. And with
Yeah.
that, there have to be a lot of big myths or misconceptions around the business of podcasting. What would you say are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions that you hear floating around out there?
Well, I think one is that it's easy. I mean, the really talented producers, hosts, creators, they make it look easy. And I think there's always a learning curve, that it takes more time. It often takes more resources than you might have initially anticipated. So that's a pretty big myth. And that's something you have to sort of dispel people of early on, that it's not just as simple as hitting the record button and putting it on the internet and it's all going to work out. I also think, there's always what is sometimes described as a creative chasm, right? There's the vision you have in your head for how a thing is going to look, sound, and feel, and then there's what you actually create. And really the only way to cross that creative chasm is through experimentation, patience, openness to feedback, and real clarity of purpose.
I always say that there's lots of ways to be right, but then there's also mistakes. Have you seen any like really big, glaring, common mistakes or pitfalls people fall into when they create their shows?
Yes, I think one thing I see in a lot of interview-based shows is that this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, I guess, but whenever shows begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, and it's sort of an open-ended question, I get very frustrated by starting any podcast with that question because what you've done as a host is you've shifted the burden of why is this person here to begin with to your guest. You as the host ought to have that reason. I really like conversations that begin with some version of the answer. I really wanted to talk to you because you have unique value and you have a story to tell. So specificity is, something that exists along the spectrum, but it's something I try to be very attentive to, particularly when it comes to interviewing.
That's sage advice. And interestingly enough, my next question was going to be what inspired you to get into this field? But see, I saved it for later. So
Yeah,
what
you
did
built up to
inspire
it.
you to get into this line of work? How'd you get started?
Yeah, so I'm an old school listener. I was actually listening to podcasts all the way back in 2005. So I got into the medium very early. Uh, my origin story is a little long and involved, but I'll try and give the short version. I actually am a refugee from academia. So years ago, I was working on a PhD at Stanford in earth science. And in a fit of desperation, I decided to start a podcast. And that was in 2011 or so. So 12 years or 10, 11, 12 years. Um, and and at the time I was listening to a lot of interview based shows, and as soon as I became a creator, I just felt like I found my calling. I mean, it just unlocked all this intellectual curiosity for me, and it also unlocked the power of audio storytelling, audio specifically, although audio and video of course are components of it these days.
Amen. I could really can connect with that because that's the same feeling I get out of it as well. Uh,
Yeah.
Michael, is there anything in regards to the business of podcasting that I didn't think to ask you that you really feel is important to share? Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, one of the first pieces of advice or guidance that I like to offer, clients who I'm working with, when we're first getting started, to me, it's always got to be an act of self-love that, no matter what is going right or wrong with your show, this is about creativity. And creativity is so internally affirming in so many ways that I think it's a really important message to start with that if you're interested in podcasting, first and foremost, think of it in that light as an act of creative self-love. Because if you do that, then everything else you do around it is going to be great, whether it winds up getting millions of downloads or maybe has a more modest listenership. If it's creative, then it's life affirming, and that's a life lesson, and that's pretty cool.
Right on. For folks listening who would love to speak with you, how can they connect with you and learn more?
Sure. I the best way to connect with me these days is through my website, 14thstreetstudios.com. So I'm on most of the social media platforms, Twitter or X, as well as LinkedIn. You can send me an email. You can get in touch at Michael at 14thstreetstudios.com. 14th Street Studios is spelled out. And you can also listen to my most recent podcast, which is called Famous and Gravy: Life Lessons from Dead Celebrities. So I'm available through all the Famous and Gravy channels as well. It's a fun show.
Michael, this has been terrific. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with my audience today, and I wish you continued success for you and for all of your clients.
Mark, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's really a pleasure to connect with you again, and I really am grateful for everything.
That was Michael Osborne, the founder of 14th Street Studios, and this segment's been brought to you by booksgrowbusiness.com. It's the place where busy professionals get published to educate consumers, grow their businesses, and to leave a legacy. That's all for now. I'm Mark Imperial, and thanks for joining me.